Hello, welcome to a new video in which I am going to attempt to wrap up the books that I have read within the month of May. Also, we're in a new filming setup today. I want to try and film more in here. I have all the lights set up in here for Twitch for filming, so I can just use it for filming for YouTube, and I just never use it, and I don't know why, so we're just gonna see how this goes. So I entered this month feeling pretty slumpy. I was quite slow to finish anything and I wasn't necessarily loving the books I was reading, as I'll go into in a minute. So I'm kind of surprised I somehow ended up with 9 books in my wrap up this month. I definitely attribute that to a certain few books that I think got me out of my reading slump, but I didn't expect to read 9. I definitely think I could also attribute that partially to Bookopothon, which encouraged me to read nearly 4 books over one weekend, so that certainly helped as well. Let's see what the 9 books were. So the first book I finished was an audiobook, and this was Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is book 2 in the Raven Boys series, cycle, whatever it's called. How many books? If it's 4 books in a series, what's that called? Is it like a quartet? Quartet of books. This is number 2 in a quartet of the Raven Boys. I did not enjoy this one as much as I did the first book. I think this magic system is quite unique and enjoyable, and I like the fact that it's founded in ley lines and things like that. However, I felt like this one, for me, lost its direction a little bit. Obviously the name of this one does allude to the fact that it is something to do with dreams, and within dreams pretty much anything can happen, and I love books that centre around a dreamlike world, something in the way that Alice in Wonderland has this anything can happen impossible nonsensicalness to it. So I had very high hopes for this, and I do think that a lot of the ways that the author used the dream world was very clever, and I did enjoy how it definitely did reflect that kind of feeling of nothing makes sense in a dream, but yet it all makes sense in a dream. I did like that. However, I felt for me this one just went off track a little bit, and I don't know why. I did still enjoy it. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I don't know why I just didn't click with it as much this time round. We were following slightly different characters as our main characters in this one, so I don't know if that had something to do with it, but I am obviously continuing on with the series. I haven't continued yet on with the series, but I will be doing them all as audiobooks. Then I read what has come out as my worst rated book of the year so far. This is Ghosted by Jen Ashworth. This follows a woman whose husband has gone missing and she's decided not to report it to the police for 5 weeks. We do not know what's happened to him. We believe she does not know what's happened to him, and it is the question of where has he gone, but also looking at her as she is kind of the one that's been left behind, not knowing anything. This is a big critical piece of writing on these two characters and their marriage and how they've treated each other throughout that marriage. And I really hated it. I particularly hated the main character. She was incredibly unlikable, and no matter how deliberate that was, for me, if I do not like the main character even a smidgen, I don't really enjoy reading the book at all because I have nobody to root for. I need somebody to root for as a reader, just somebody, just one person, whereas everyone in this book had dislikable factors about them in more ways than just like a couple of small things that you don't like. They weren't just morally grey, they were properly grey. It just felt like they were all there to be disliked, therefore there was no hope within this book at all, and it felt incredibly bleak and dreary. And it just didn't really conclude either, which annoyed me. This whole time you've got this question of what's happened to this guy. And honestly, I felt like even at the end, when everything had been said and done, I still didn't feel like I personally had a roundup of this story. And for me, that just was really disappointing, and I didn't like it, so I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I then read the 2 books that got me out of my reading slump. I read The Deal and the Mistake by Elle Kennedy. These are the first 2 books in the Off-Campus series. I read these on my Kindle, so I don't have physical copies of them, but these are contemporary adult smutty romances set at university following a group of people. Each book follows a different couple, and it's just simple, easy fun, these books. They are smutty where they need to be, and it's not crap smut either. Like, it's fairly decent. I didn't dislike all of the sex scenes. Certainly laughed at a couple of descriptions. I have a whole reading vlog on reading smut for a week if you do want to check that out, because I talk more about the bits in specifics that made me laugh or that I wanted to bring to light, but generally they were quite decent sex scenes. These books certainly empowered sex positivity. There were a couple of questionable things throughout them that I wasn't quite getting on board with when it talked about things that should have been sex positive, but in fact they were contributing to a taboo, which I wasn't necessarily a big fan of. However, the other parts of it outweighed that for me, and I did just have a really good time. I liked the university setting as well. I absolutely loved my time at university, and I do sometimes feel quite sad thinking that it's over, so to be able to kind of dive back into it in the way of fiction, for me, feels really good. So both of these books came out as 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. I feel like it's impossible to rate them much higher because they are not great works of literary genius, and I have to bear that in mind when talking about them because they are just meant to be easy fun reads. So I don't really feel like for me they can get like a super high rating because the writing is never going to be absolutely brilliant. However, they made me laugh, they got me out of a reading slump, they gave me an escapist feeling, and for that I really enjoyed them. I do mostly rate books based on enjoyment, and something that is written meh but that I absolutely love to bits may come out as a 5 stars for me. So it doesn't have to have like the world's best writing for me to give it 5 stars, but again, these ones didn't have like much about them of the plot. They were pretty predictable, but you're reading them for a good easy time, and that is what you get. So 3.5 out of 5 stars for these two. Then I went to a forest for the day and vlogged that, which you can also check out on my channel, and I read Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. This is a creepy YA horror following a group of students who go into this very weird forest to try and save a girl that went missing 1 year ago when she was researching into a missing case from the 50s. So we have several different lines of missing people and people going after them and getting caught in this very strange forest experience. This forest is certainly haunted with some very creepy things going on. This book is told throughout different types of media. There's interviews, there's text messages, and then there's also just normal chapters. So we're seeing different timelines of the same event throughout this narrative. This gave me the creeps several times, to the point where I didn't really want to read it at night anymore. So as a horror, it achieved everything it probably set out to achieve for me. Where this didn't quite hit the mark for me is at times it felt too lost, and like there wasn't really much of a plot stringing together with it, and it was just them getting lost in this forest with the creepy things happening to them, and I didn't really feel like I was connected to the plot. There was a direction it was heading in, but I just didn't really feel like much of it made much sense towards the end. And again, this is a kind of book where it was meant to be nonsensical to a certain element. However, because you have interviews taking place that are after the events of the book, you do know that there is some kind of conclusion that you're heading towards. So it was just making sense of how it all got there. I did like it. I thought the atmosphere was very good, very dark, very creepy. I just didn't really feel too much of a connection to the plot and the characters, which may be a running theme for a couple of books this month actually. So I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I finished The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This was a chonky read, and I somehow read it in 4 days. I don't really know how that happened. Definitely, again, helping that I was taking part in Bookgoplathon for a weekend of finishing this book, but I really wanted to get this read before I went on holiday because I did not want to bring this with me. So that was my mission, and I achieved it. I honestly was so hyped to read this. My mum has been telling me for ages how much I love this book. I've heard several good things about it online. When I started it, the atmosphere completely drew me in, and I was really interested in it. This follows people who are researching into vampires, but specifically Dracula, and the idea that Dracula is potentially real. It's got a lot of different layers to it, stories within stories within stories at some point. But for me, whilst the atmosphere was fantastic, and I think that the settings were all really well described, and I think it was really well written, I just didn't click with this book either. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't love it, and I think it just fell a bit flat for me. I think it was too long, in my opinion. It could have been shorter and not lost any of the sentiment that it had. It felt far too stretched out for not enough action. There were no high action points in this, really. There were a couple of perilous moments, but for me, if a book's going to be this long, I need a big build up to a specific moment. And the big moments just kind of crept up on you, and then you were like, oh, okay, that's happened then. And then they were over. So I think for that reason, I didn't really feel as gripped to this, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So I did still like it, and the writing is undoubtedly very good, I just felt like it was stretched out for too long and it didn't grab my attention the whole time. So I'd say up until this point, we're very much sitting in the 3-star category. I've enjoyed books like the Off-Campus series a lot, so I wouldn't say it's been like a bad reading month as such. It's just been a kind of average reading month. I've not given anything above a 3.5 stars until A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. This is such a good book. This is a contemporary / historical fiction because we go between 2 time zones. However, saying historical fiction pains me a little bit because one of them is the 90s and one of them is 2008, which in my head neither of those are historical fiction, but I think because of the 90s that's what's put it into Goodreads historical fiction category. As someone born in the 90s, I'm not okay with that, but it is in the past, so I can understand the logic. Anyway, moving on. So this follows 3 generations of women. One timeline is the 90s, as I said, where we follow one woman who has come from Palestine to America to get married. We also follow in that timeline, in that timeline, part of history. In that year, we're also following her mother-in-law. And then in the 2008 time zone, year, we're following this woman's daughter. So we have 3 different generations spanned across one book. This is very much a story of society's expectations. This talks about mental health, it talks about domestic abuse, it talks about parental relationships as well. There is a lot that this dives into, and it's not a big book, so to do it so well and eloquently in this amount of pages I think is a real talent from this author. We're seeing the main character in the 90s move from Palestine to America, seeing the change in culture there and what it's like for her to be absorbed into this new culture and what's expected of her as a wife. And then we see her daughter, who is at a similar age to when we see the mum in the 90s, and she doesn't want the life that people are telling her that she has to have, and she wants to break free from that, and she really wants to have the freedom of choice. And that's really what this is centric about, is that freedom of choice, which was portrayed so beautifully through these pages, and also so sad as well. There's a lot of moments in this that did feel really sad. At the same time as well, we're also following the mother-in-law, who we're seeing in the 90s, who is also the person looking after the daughter in 2008. So we see her in multiple different timelines as well. And seeing her perspective is really interesting because she is somebody that we get multiple different angles of from each of the other characters. So seeing it from her perspective gives a little bit more thought behind her actions and is very interesting. Generally, I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was really, really brilliant and I would highly recommend it. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read a graphic novel. I read Wind, Book 1, The Flight of the Prince, and this is by James Tion IV and Michael Dialness? I might have said that wrong. This is a graphic novel series following a young boy who is different to everyone else in his town. He is magic, or a weird blood as they're called in this book. And if you have magic in your blood in this town, it is punishable by death. This boy has been hiding who he is his whole life, and it's now coming to light who he is, and he has to get out and escape. So this is about his journey trying to get his freedom. The illustration style in this book is absolutely beautiful. The colours, just everything, the attention to detail is so, so pretty. At the same time as the story just being really, really good. I think this book is going to become fantasy romance. At the moment we're centred on the fantasy, but I'm getting the impression there might be an LGBT romance brewing as well, which I'm very excited about. I have got the second book on my wish list now, so I will hopefully be reading that one soon because this was just really good fun. And if you're looking for a good fantasy graphic novel recommendation, I would definitely say this one. And I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the final book I read in the month of May is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. This book follows our main character who dives into the ocean instead of her brother's girlfriend or wife, who is sacrificing herself to the sea god. Every year one girl or woman is sacrificed to the sea god in order to stop the storms that are destroying their town. So this year our main character dives in place of the person that was chosen to be the sacrifice, and she ends up in this spirit world in which she has to try and stop these storms and also get the life that she wants as well. This is another fantasy romance. It's very beautiful, very visual. I really enjoyed the imagery throughout the whole of this book. This cover is a perfect representation of the vibes you will get from this book. It feels very enchanting and just lovely to read about. The magic system is really beautiful. Everything is very pretty and beautiful. Those are the words I'm going to use to describe this because it feels right. Everything does feel like it's kind of just touched with a little magic stick that just makes everything absolutely stunning. Makes for a very pleasant reading experience. Now, my only gripe with this book, now I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I think the only reason it didn't get a little bit higher than that is because the pacing was so fast that I personally didn't feel like I had enough time to get connected with the characters, with the plot, and with where we were going. I didn't feel like I had a connection with those characters, and I have said this throughout a couple of books this month, so maybe this is a me thing, but the pacing is very, very fast here, which is a good thing normally, I find, because it keeps you entertained. You are immediately thrown into the story here. You don't get any establishing that who her family are, what she's doing all of this for. You just kind of are thrown in and are told why rather than shown why. And I think for me, I needed to be shown a little bit more. I needed to have an empathy with this character for more reasons than just her saying she was doing it for her family, because I just didn't really feel like we got much of a development as to who she was. I didn't really feel like I ever knew her, even though we were following her as our main character. Saying that, I did really enjoy the characters, I just didn't feel invested in them because I didn't feel like I had enough information, and with the pacing, it did feel like suddenly the action happened and then very quickly it ended and we were on to the next thing without much of a build up to it or much description. So I could imagine the action parts in my head. The setting I could completely imagine, but specific moments happening weren't necessarily quite as strong for me. However, saying all of this, I do have very visual imagery throughout this whole book of how it panned out. I can see it all very clearly and I feel like it will stay with me for quite a while. It was really, really good. The writing style is really addictive and I read this very quickly because of that. And whilst I've just said that the fast pacing for me meant I didn't feel quite as connected with the characters, it did mean that this plot went incredibly quickly and therefore felt like a very addictive read. So I definitely enjoyed this. I just wish I could have got a little bit more connected. So as I said, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. So that is my May wrap up. I'm very excited to see what June brings. I have a smaller TBR for June so that I can mood read, because we have Whatever You Want-a-thon, which is a readathon hosted by Maddie from Book Browsing blog. I am one of the team captain for Team Sunset Scholars, woo! So I'm really looking forward to taking part in that, but I'm hoping that I can mood read a little bit around my TBR as well, because that helped me get out of the slump this month. I wasn't necessarily planning on reading some of the books that I read this month, particularly the off-campus series, but it helped. I am ultimately a mood reader. Whilst I set TBRs, I like them as a guide roughly, but I do still prefer mood reading because I don't think anything can beat what you just fancy right there and then, and that's always going to be what you'll probably end up enjoying the most. But I like the guidance sometimes of a TBR. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, please do give it a thumbs up, comment down below how many books you read in May, subscribe to see more of my face on your feed. You can also find a link below to my Patreon where I post lots of extra content, and also my shop link where I sell Lightroom presets and Instagram story highlight covers. Thank you so much for watching, keep smiling and stay positive.